Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Quincy Carrier here at the East-West Shrine Bowl. This is day 2. It's my first day here, but it's day 2 of the East-West Shrine Bowl. Kind of doing this with an impromptu setup. Thanks to my friends over at Daft on Draft. Make sure you guys go check them out. You guys know Corey Kinnan, friend of the show, does great work here. And if you want to be locked in on draft coverage, even larger scale than just what the Cleveland Browns are going to do, the Daft on Draft is one of the best places to go. So make sure you guys go check them out. So at East West Shrine, it is what I think you can classify as a Texas blizzard here in Frisco, Texas. But I was able to go to practice and watch some football and watch some guys before I give my individual takes on certain individual players. You know, it's really more at a bowl like this about just getting a idea for the depth of the draft class, right? Like who's going to be available where, filling out some of these names that you've really only seen, you know, or paid attention to it, like, you know, on big boards or conversations like that, and really getting eyes on them and getting like real opinions. And, you know, I like to think of these bowls for a lot of people in the draft space, and especially if you're a fan of a specific team and you're wondering who you should want your team to go get. You know, it's kind of like Wikipedia, right? You know, it's the starting point of your research, but it shouldn't be the end of your research. You know, if you like a player at the bowl, you should go and see what their all 22 looks like if you can get access to it, or just, you know, go and watch them play more football. So, you know, always that is a disclaimer. Sometimes people get to these all-star games, somebody has a bad week, they write them off completely. And it's not really fair, right? And the opposite can happen too, right? Somebody has an amazing week. They look like an all-star, the best player you ever seen. Don't check their tape. The tape might have some more holes in it. And you end up in a situation where you might be overrating a player, right? We've all made those mistakes in excitement before. So at the East-West Shrine game, again, just trying to get a feel for who's out there. When we're talking about the Cleveland Browns, you know, I think the holes have been pretty consistently talked about, no matter who you watch or who talks about this team. You know, we talk about holes on the offensive line, holes at wide receiver, probably need another tight end on the roster, you know. DB, I think, is somewhere you can look. Safety, I think, is another place that you would want to pay attention to if you're Cleveland. But just in general, though, those are the spots where there have been known, I would say, holes on the roster, right? So when I go to these games this week, I'm going to East West Shrine these 2 days. Then I'll head to Mobile and be there for all 3 days of the Senior Bowl. So when I'm here at these all-star games, I'm trying to get a grasp on, you know, players who can kind of fit what the Browns want to do in those positions of need. And, you know, you got to ask yourself, okay, well, what do the Browns need in those position groups? What skill sets do they need? Because it's easy to say, oh, we need a tackle, we need a guard, we need a center. But what do you need those centers to do? What kind of skill set you think is going to thrive in what you're going to do? That's the difficult part to answer right now with the Cleveland Browns, right? They don't have a head coach right now. If we're looking at the head coach search, it seems like it's coming down to Grant Udinski and Nate Schillhouse. Don't know who's going to land a job between the two of them. If Jim Schwartz takes the job, it's a big question mark on what that offense is going to look like, because we don't know who he's going to bring in an offense coordinator. So you're kind of flying blind here, right? You know, there might be some tackles that look really good. They're doing some things really well, but maybe it's not going to fit what eventually the Browns are going to do. You know, maybe you're seeing some big guys who can really move a lot, you know, move a lot of ass on grass, but you go into an offense where you need more finesse out of some of your guards, right? So keep that in mind as we go through some of the takeaways from East West Shrine and the Senior Bowl and the All-Star games in general, especially before the Browns have a coach. It's kind of weird being in this position. It's kind of weird that this is a weird position, Browns fans, right? Like, we are used to the turnover at coach, but for 5 years, we did not have turnover. We knew exactly what to look for these positions, and now it's a little different. So, bear with me as we all get used to that. So let's talk about some players that I thought were impressive today. 73, Micah Pettis. He didn't have a helmet if you were watching the coverage on TV, but I believe he's Florida State. Let me double check my roster here to make sure I'm correct on that, but I do believe he is Florida State. He was pretty impressive in individuals. I don't think he did team. I have to double check if he did team, but I don't think he did team. He's 6'6", 346. These are official measurements here. Long arms, good wingspan, pretty impressive frame. You look at him in pads and you say to yourself, that's what an offensive lineman looks like. And I thought he had a pretty good day. I didn't get to see him in team. I think he might have come up here recently, so that might explain why he wasn't in team. But what you saw with him in individuals was pretty impressive. In general, I think my takeaways would be that the West offensive line was a bit more impressive than the East offensive line today. If we're looking at wide receivers who stood out, I think there was a Georgia wide receiver. You just look at him, the build is exactly what you want from that position, right? Kobe Young, 6'3", 215 pounds. He has almost 10-inch hands, 32-inch arms, and a long wingspan. Again, you just kind of look at him. It kind of reminds me of Cedric Tillman, right? When you see Cedric Tillman in person, you really get a grasp for how big he is. The real question, and this is what you have to go back on tape to find out, is like, hey, is he a big guy who uses that size effectively? Is he going to play big? A lot of guys who have the size don't really know how to use that size well, or don't really have the instincts to use that size well. From what I saw, there were some pretty nice releases from him. He went for a couple of balls. He did have a couple of drops. But if you're looking for a guy who fits that frame of a wide receiver that the Browns don't have, right, a go up and get him guy, he's somebody who physically he fits that bill there. Riley Mahlman, apologize if I mispronounced these names or kind of jumbled them up. Again, trying to make use of a bit of a unique situation here. All right. So yes, Riley Mahlman, offensive tackle from Wisconsin. He was interesting. He's a big guy, 6'8", 304. The big thing with him, I think, will be is one, got to watch more tape of him in Wisconsin, see how he does when he's asked to move and hit stuff in space. I thought he was really good in some individual drill stuff, and even in some team drill stuff, I thought he did well. But when they asked him to kind of get out in space, it started to look a little bit more, you start to feel that he's 6'8", 306, right? We've seen this problem with a prospect like DeJuan Jones, right? For example, we see this with a prospect like DeJuan Jones, for example. DeJuan is somebody who's giant. He gets his hands on you. It's over with. But the big issue with DeJuan in the Browns offense is that, hey, when you ask him to get out in space like you're going to ask a tackle to do and go out and hit some moving targets, he's completely incapable of doing that, which really limits what you can do with him, and really limits what can go wrong on the offensive line around him. So really thought he had a good day, but question about the space. It's again going to come down to who you hire. Are they going to have a scheme that really relies on that? Or, are they going to be in a situation where, you're looking at what the Browns want to do and they just want guys who can whip some ass, you know what I mean? Guys who can just move some ass on grass, get you a couple of yards, and put you in, at least get you closer to being ahead of the chains. It's really going to be up to what the philosophy is on offense. And again, it's what makes this difficult right now. If we want to talk about a quarterback, again, we're talking about the Browns quarterback situation. I've talked about this at maximum. there's really not a desire for me to draft a quarterback at this point. Now that you don't really have a pathway for Dante Moore, he went back to college. Fernando Mendoza looks like the number 1 overall pick locked. So you're sitting in that situation. Do you really want to add more to a room that already doesn't have much? Maybe if you go nuclear, you decide to trade Shador, trade Dillon, and just completely move on from the room entirely, then you consider it. But I do think that the possibility of them drafting another day 2 quarterback, day 3 quarterback after drafting a day 2 quarterback last year and a day 3 quarterback last year, I don't really think they're high. But again, new offensive coordinator, new offensive coach, new head coach, which could mean, completely new outlook on that quarterback room, and new coach might come in and want to get rid of everybody. So Mark Gronowski, I would say, probably was the best quarterback of the day. Do I feel confident saying that? Let me look at who played quarterback today, just to double check. Kyron Drones, probably not going to be it. Kate Klubnik, he had a couple nice throws. Morton, no. Jalen Daniels was, you can see the tools with Jalen Daniels. I wouldn't write him off completely. I wouldn't say he had the best day here to Haynes King, not even sure if he played. Mark Gronowski, Joe Fagnano. Yeah, I feel pretty confident saying Mark Gronowski was the best quarterback today. He was really throwing the ball in the middle of the field, being confident in those decisions. Again, depending on what kind of offense you run, that's going to be really important. Might not be important at all, depending on what other offenses you run. Got to really figure out what that fit's going to be. We got more to talk about, but real quick, I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Hey, have you ever heard of the Sleeper app? Well, here's a fun secret. It's not just for fantasy leagues. It's great for fantasy leagues. I personally have used it for years with my college friends to play fantasy football and to do pick'em leagues, all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the Sleeper app also gives you news. It gives you scores. You can also try to turn your football knowledge into real money. Just download the Sleeper app and pick more or less on your favorite players with more stats than any other daily fantasy app. Just choose 2 or more of your favorite players from pregame or live. Pick more or less from the predicted stats, and you could win up to 100 times your money if your picks win. Use promo code Worst Take and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Again, promo code Worst Take, you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Links are in the description. So we talked about some standouts from the East-West Shrine Bowl in day 1. Well, day 2, actually. Really excited to get to see these guys practice again tomorrow. The big question here for Cleveland going forward with the draft and with their philosophy, what they want to do going forward is what is the hopes for the direction of the offense? This is where I think, some people will have their criticism of the fact that the Browns don't have a head coach right now. Right. They're going into East-West Shrine Week. They're going into Senior Bowl week without a head coach. And that's going to make getting specific about players difficult because you're in a situation where you really don't know what skill sets you're going to be, favoring by the time you get to the draft at certain positions because you don't really know what the goal is. You're hoping to retain some continuity on defense, so that makes it a little bit easier. And you've had so much success on defense, it's hard to imagine that they do anything drastically different. But when it comes to offense, we're talking about an offense last year that was minus 140 in expected points. The year before, minus 160. We're talking about some of the worst offense that we've seen over a 2-year period in the NFL history. If you look at the Browns' expected points over the last 2 years and you subtract them from the 31st team both years, Browns are minus 100 worse than those teams. So you can't expect that much is going to be retained from what they did last year offensively, because if they wanted to do what they did last year, they would have kept Kevin Stefanski, but obviously they decided to make a move off of him. So the real question is like, hey, the Browns offense is going to change. The Browns offense is going to look different. The question is, when we get to that point, will we have enough information on all these guys to be able to make the right decisions about the people who fit what the Browns want to do? Obviously, the Browns have scouts here. They have coaches that are still on the payroll that they are likely to retain down here. You know, they have a presence here. That's not the problem. The question is like, hey, when it comes down to filtering these guys out to be more specific to what you want to do going forward, you know, that's where it starts to matter. Like, look at a player like Zach Zinter, if you want an example of how somebody can struggle in a situation like that, right? Zach Zinter comes in, third round pick, the same year that Andy Dickerson takes the offensive line job. Now, for whatever reason, Andy Dickerson gets fired. He doesn't get fired, but he stops running the offensive line meetings about 6 weeks into the season. So all of a sudden, this guy who comes in with Zach Zinter gets drafted. You know, he comes in with Andy Dickerson to kind of do what Andy Dickerson wants to do with the offensive line. And then all of a sudden, he's gone. They go back to kind of what they did with Kevin back in 2023, which is not what they were trying to do in 2024. And, you know, Zach Zinter gets lost in the shuffle, and now he's inactive all the time. You know, you got to be really clear on why it is that you think a player fits what you want to do specifically. And I think that's going to be the part that's difficult for the Browns when they are still in the process of deciding who's going to run this team. So it's going to be fun to keep an eye on players, fun to look at people, but it's also understanding that until we know who that head coach is, what that offense is going to look like, and what that philosophy is on offense, we're not really going to be able to filter this down to specific players unless we're talking about like the top of the draft where it's just like talent overall, right? We're talking about like day 2, day 3. You got to get a little bit more specific there. And right now, that's why I worry might be hurt for the team. But you guys let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Everybody have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.